Hey there? Go on, find yourself a comfortable spot. Lie down. Let your body sink into the bed, or the couch, or wherever you are. Just settle. Dim the lights if you haven't already. Let the brightness of the day fade away. That's it. Take a slow breath in, and let it out even slower. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here with me tonight. I've been thinking about something interesting, something that might seem a little funny at first, but the more you think about it, the more fascinating it becomes. Tonight, we're going to talk about how people used to sleep in the ancient world, specifically in one of the hottest places on Earth. We're going to visit ancient Egypt, but we're not going to talk about pyramids or pharaohs or treasure. No, tonight, we're going to talk about something much quieter, much more ordinary. We're going to talk about how regular people closed their eyes at the end of a long, hot day, and somehow, some way, they found rest. Can you imagine it? No air conditioning. No electric fans. No refrigerators to grab a cold drink from. Just the sun, beating down day after day, and the dry desert air, and people who had to figure out how to live, and work, and yes, how to sleep. And you know what? They did it. They did it so well that their civilization lasted for 3,000 years. 3,000 years of sleeping in the heat. So they must have known something, mustn't they? Close your eyes now. Let's go back. Way, way back. Let the modern world fade away. Let go of your air conditioner, your electric lights, your smartphone. Let all of that just drift away. We're going back to the banks of the Nile River, to a time when the rhythm of life was set by the sun and the river, by the seasons of flood and harvest, by the cool of the evening and the heat of midday. Let me tell you about a day in ancient Egypt. A regular day. The kind of day that happened thousands and thousands of times, for thousands of years. The day begins before dawn. This is important. In the desert, in the heat, you don't wait for the sun to wake you. You wake before the sun. In the villages along the Nile, in the workers' quarters near the great building sites, in the small mud brick houses that lined the narrow streets, people would begin to stir in the darkness. Not because they had alarm clocks. No, they woke because their bodies knew. Because generations of living in the heat had taught them that the cool hours before sunrise were precious. Those were the hours to get things done. Imagine waking in the darkness. The air is cool. Actually cool. It might even feel a little chilly after the heat of the day before. This is the gift the desert gives, you see. The same dryness that makes the days so scorching hot lets the nights cool down. There's no moisture in the air to hold the heat. So when the sun sets, the temperature drops. Not to freezing, of course. But enough. Enough to sleep. Enough to rest. Enough to let your body cool down after baking all day. You're lying on your bed. Let me tell you about that bed. For most people, it wasn't very fancy. The wealthy had bed frames, beautiful wooden frames with woven cords stretched across them, a bit like a hammock but flat. Sometimes the wood was carved. Sometimes the legs of the bed were shaped like animal legs, like a lion's paws or a bull's hoofs. Isn't that something? Your bed standing on lion's feet. But for most people, the bed was simpler. A raised platform made of mud brick, built right into the corner of the room. Or a simple wooden frame. Or even just a mat on the floor. The mat. Let's talk about the mat for a moment, because this is where the cleverness begins. The Egyptians made their sleeping mats from reeds. River reeds, cut from the banks of the Nile. They would weave them, carefully, patiently, into long mats. And here's the thing about reed mats. They breathe. Air can move through them. And they stay cool. Cooler than fabric. Cooler than leather. When you lie down on a reed mat, even in the heat, it doesn't trap your body heat the way a thick mattress would. It lets the air circulate. It lets the heat escape. Some people would sleep on linen sheets, if they could afford them. Linen. Beautiful, cool linen. Do you know about linen? It comes from the flax plant. The Egyptians grew flax in their fields, along with wheat and barley. They would harvest the flax, Wet it in water to soften it, then beat the fibers and spin them into thread. Such fine thread. The Egyptian linen was famous throughout the ancient world. It was so fine that some linen was almost see-through, light as a whisper. And linen stays cool. Even in the heat, linen feels cool against your skin. It wicks moisture away. It breathes. When you lie down on a linen sheet, on a woven reed mat, in a mud brick house designed to stay cool, you can rest. Even in Egypt. Even in the heat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you through the day, so you can understand how sleep was just one part of a whole system, a whole way of living that made the heat bearable. So you wake before dawn. The house is dark. The darkness is cool and gentle. You can hear, maybe, the sound of your neighbors beginning to stir. A door opening. The soft sound of footsteps. Someone going to draw water from the canal or the well. Water. Always water. The Nile gave Egypt life. Everyone knows that. But it wasn't just the floods that made the crops grow. It was the daily gift of water. Cool water. Water to drink, to wash with, to cook with, to pour on the ground to settle the dust. You get up. The floor is cool under your feet. Mud brick, or packed earth, or if you're in a nicer home, perhaps stone. Stone stays cool, you see. Especially limestone. Especially at night. The Egyptians knew this. They knew stone. They built with stone, lived with stone, learned all its secrets. During the day, the stone would slowly warm up, but it took a long time. The walls were thick. By the time the heat of the day had soaked through the outer layer, the evening would come, and the walls would start to cool again. Always a little behind the outside air. Always a little cooler during the day, a little warmer at night. The house breathing slowly, in and out, in rhythm with the sun. You step outside. The stars are still visible, fading now as the sky begins to lighten in the east. The air is so clear. Desert air, dry and clean. You can see so many stars. The Egyptians loved the stars, you know. They watched them carefully. They marked the seasons by them. They believed the sky was a goddess, Nut, her body arched over the earth, swallowing the sun each night and giving birth to it each morning. Imagine believing that. Imagine watching the sunrise and thinking, the goddess is bringing back the light. The first tasks of the day happen now, in the cool. If you're a farmer, you head to the fields. If you're a worker, you head to your work site. If you're a baker, you start your ovens. If you're a potter, you check on yesterday's pots drying in the shade. Everyone moves quickly, quietly, getting things done before the real heat arrives. And then the sun rises. The sun in Egypt is not gentle. Even in the morning, you can feel its strength. It climbs into the sky, and the temperature climbs with it. By mid-morning, it's already getting hot. By midday, it's scorching. This is when everything changes. This is when the rhythm of Egyptian life becomes clear. At midday, you stop. Everyone stops. This isn't laziness. This is survival. You find shade. You find the coolest place you can. You rest. This is part of how they slept, you see. They didn't just sleep at night. They rested during the hottest part of the day. A midday rest. A siesta, though they wouldn't have called it that. They would just have thought of it as the sensible thing to do. When the sun is high, you don't work. You rest. Where do you rest? In your house. In the coolest room. Let me tell you about the houses, because this is where the real genius shows. Egyptian houses, for ordinary people, were made of mud brick. They would take mud from the Nile, mix it with straw, pack it into wooden molds, and then leave the bricks to dry in the sun. Thousands and thousands of bricks, to build a house. The walls would be thick. Very thick. Sometimes 2 feet thick, or more. And this thickness was the secret. Heat takes a long time to travel through thick mud brick. During the day, while the sun beat down on the outside walls, the inside stayed cool. The heat would slowly seep inward, but by the time it reached the inner surface of the wall, the day was over. The sun was setting. And the whole process would reverse. The roofs were flat. Most roofs in Egypt were flat, because it almost never rained. Why waste effort on a pitched roof to shed rain that never comes? The flat roofs were useful. People would dry food up there, store things, and on hot nights, they would sleep up there. Imagine that. Climbing a ladder or a set of stairs to the roof of your house, carrying your mat, lying down under the stars. The breeze, what little breeze there was, could reach you up there. The day's heat would radiate out of the mud brick, but by late evening, the roof would start to cool. And you would lie there, looking up at the goddess nuts stretched across the sky, and you would drift off to sleep. But let me tell you about the inside of the house first, because that's where people spent the midday hours, and where many people slept most of the year. The houses were designed for coolness. The windows were small, placed high on the walls. This kept the harsh sunlight out, but still let air circulate. Some houses had wind catchers. These were beautiful, clever things. A wind catcher was a shaft built into the roof, open at the top, designed to catch the breeze and funnel it down into the house. The breeze, even a hot breeze, feels cooler when it's moving. It evaporates the moisture from your skin. It keeps the air from getting stale and stifling. Some wealthy homes had even more elaborate systems. They would have a room with a wind catcher, and below the opening, they would place jars of water. The breeze would blow over the water, picking up a bit of moisture, and that moisture would evaporate, cooling the air slightly. It's the same principle as those misting fans you see today, but without electricity. Just wind, water, and clever design. The rooms were arranged carefully. The living areas, where people spent their time, were toward the back of the house, away from the street, away from the direct sun. The front rooms, the ones that faced the sun, were used for storage, or for work that could be done quickly in the morning. Everything was thought out. Everything had a purpose. And the floors. Some houses had floors that were slightly below street level. Dug down a little into the earth. Because the earth stays cool. A few feet down, the temperature is constant, much cooler than the surface. So a room that's partly underground, with thick mud brick walls and a small high window, would stay remarkably cool, even at midday. Imagine resting in such a room. The heat of the day pressing down outside, but here, in the dimness, it's cool. Quiet. The only sound is perhaps the distant murmur of the river, or children playing somewhere in the shade, or the soft clucking of chickens in a neighbor's yard. You lie down on your mat. The linen is smooth and cool. Your body relaxes. You can feel the day's work in your muscles, but that's all right. This is the time to rest. Your eyes close. The darkness is gentle. And you sleep, just for a little while, just enough to get through the afternoon. When you wake, the worst of the heat has passed. It's still hot, yes, but the sun is lower now. There's work to be done, but it's bearable again. You drink some water. Perhaps you eat a little bread, some onions, a few dates. Simple food, but good. And you go back to your tasks. As the evening comes, the air cools. This is the best time of day. The work is done, or nearly done. The shadows grow long. The light turns golden, then amber, then deep blue. The stars begin to appear. Families gather. People talk, share the day's news. Children play in the streets. Neighbors sit on benches outside their doors, enjoying the cool. And then, as the night deepens, it's time to sleep again. Real sleep. The long sleep that will carry you through to the next dawn. Let me tell you more about the sleeping arrangements, because there are so many details, so many small things that made it work. Headrests. The ancient Egyptians used headrests instead of pillows. Isn't that interesting? A headrest was a curved piece of wood or sometimes stone, raised up on a small stand. You would lie down and rest the curve of your neck on it. It seems uncomfortable, doesn't it? But there were reasons. A headrest kept your head elevated, which helped with breathing in the dry air. It kept your head cool. A fabric pillow would trap heat, but a wooden or stone headrest stayed cool all night. And it kept insects away from your face. Scorpions, beetles, the little creatures that come out at night. With your head raised, they couldn't easily crawl across your face while you slept. Some headrests were plain. Smooth wood, simple and functional. But some were beautiful. Carved with prayers, or images of the gods. Some had images of Bes, the dwarf god who protected sleep and drove away nightmares. Imagine that. Laying your head down on a prayer. On a wish for peaceful dreams. Every night, the same small ritual. The same cool touch of wood against your neck. And what did people wear to bed? In the heat, very little. Often nothing at all. Why would you? The Egyptians weren't particularly modest about bodies. Nudity was normal, practical. Children ran around naked. Workers in the fields often wore just a simple loincloth, or nothing. At night, in the privacy of your home, you would wear whatever was comfortable. For many, that meant nothing. For some, a light linen shift. The linen so thin it barely existed. Just a whisper of fabric to keep the insects off, or for modesty if you were sharing a room with others. The wealthy might sleep on beds with fine linen sheets, even canopies. Not thick canopies like you might imagine, but light ones. Sheer linen curtains draped around the bed. This served several purposes. It kept insects out. It created a sense of privacy. And it helped with air circulation. The fabric would move slightly with any breeze, creating a gentle stirring of air. But most people didn't have canopies. Most people just had their mat, their headrest, maybe a light sheet to cover themselves. And that was enough. Let me tell you about the seasons, because sleep in Egypt wasn't the same all year round. The Egyptians divided their year into 3 seasons, each tied to the Nile. There was Ahet, the inundation, when the river flooded. There was Pert, the growing season when the waters receded and crops were planted. And there was Shemu, the harvest, the dry season, the hottest time of year. During Ahet, the flood season, the weather was actually milder. The water, vast amounts of water spreading across the floodplain, moderated the temperature. Everything was humid, yes, but not as scorching hot. Nights could be quite pleasant. This was a time when sleeping indoors was comfortable. The water nearby, the slightly cooler air. People would sleep in their houses, in the usual spots. During Pert, the growing season, the weather was beautiful. Warm days, cool nights. This was the most comfortable time of year. The fields were green. The air smelled of growing things. Sleeping was easy. This was when you might sleep more deeply, more restfully. Your body recovering from the heat of Shemu, preparing for the heat to come. But Shemu was the challenge. The dry season, the hot season. This was when the real heat arrived. When the sun seemed to press down like a weight. When the ground cracked. When every breath of air felt like it had been baked in an oven. This was when the Egyptians used every trick they knew. During Shemu, more people slept on their roofs. The roofs would be swept clean. Mats would be carried up. Whole families would sleep up there, side by side, under the stars. The breeze, even a hot breeze, was better than the still air inside. And as the night went on, the breeze would cool. Just a little. Just enough. Some people would dampen their linen sheets before lying down. Wet linen against your skin. The water would evaporate slowly through the night, cooling you. It's the same principle as sweating, but controlled. Deliberate. You had to be careful, though. You didn't want to soak the sheet. Just dampen it. Too much water would make you uncomfortable. Just enough would make you cool. Water. Always water. Some houses had small pools or fountains in their courtyards. The wealthy, especially. A pool of water, even a small one, cools the air around it. The evaporation draws heat from the air. A courtyard with a pool, with plants around it, would be an oasis of coolness. Families would spend the evening there, sitting by the water, talking quietly as the stars came out. And when it was time to sleep, the rooms opening onto that courtyard would be cooler, fresher. The very wealthy, the nobles and priests and high officials, had even more elaborate houses. Multi-story houses with whole floors designed for different seasons. The upper floors, open to the breeze. The lower floors, half underground, cool and dark. They would move through their house with the seasons, living upstairs in the winter to catch the sun, downstairs in the summer to escape it. But for most people, the solutions were simpler. Thick walls, small windows, reed mats, linen sheets, a headrest, a roof under the stars, and the knowledge, passed down generation after generation, of how to live in rhythm with the heat. Let me tell you about the workers who built the pyramids. Yes, I know, I said we weren't going to talk about pyramids, but just for a moment, because we know a lot about how these workers lived. Archaeologists have found their village, you see. A whole village, preserved in the dry desert sand. The village of the workers at Deir el-Medina, who built the great tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These workers lived in small, narrow houses, packed close together on narrow streets. Not much space. Not much privacy. But those houses were designed for the heat. The streets were narrow, so the houses shaded each other. The walls were thick. The windows were tiny. And the houses were all oriented the same way, to minimize sun exposure. Each house had a main room, a living room, with a sort of platform at one end. This platform was where the family would gather in the evening. It was cool there. The platform was built of mud brick, but it was raised, allowing air to circulate underneath. And on very hot nights, some people would sleep right there, on that platform, instead of in the back rooms. The village had been carefully planned. There were wider streets running north-south to catch the prevailing winds. There was a system of covered walkways, so people could move around in the shade. Everything was designed to make life in the heat bearable. And these workers, they had a schedule that matched the heat. They would work for 8 days, then have 2 days off. During their work days, they would labor in the tombs, underground where it was cooler. They would start early, work until midday, then rest through the hottest hours. In the late afternoon, they would work again. And at night, they would return to their village, to their small cool houses, and they would sleep. We know this because they left records. Lots of records. These workers were literate. They kept notes. They wrote down when they were absent from work, and why. Too much heat, some of the records say. Or resting from the sun. They knew their limits. They knew when to push and when to rest. And their society allowed for that. Expected it, even. Isn't that something? A civilization that accepted, as a simple fact, that when it's too hot, you rest. You don't try to push through. You don't force yourself. You just rest. You find a cool spot. You lie down. You close your eyes. You wait for the heat to pass. There's a gentleness to that. A wisdom. A respect for the body and its limits. Let me tell you about the fabrics they used, because this is important. Linen, yes, we've talked about linen. But the quality of the linen varied. For the wealthy, the finest linen. So fine it was called woven air. So light and thin you could see right through it. A garment made of this linen would be like wearing nothing at all, just a shimmer of white, but it would protect you from the sun and let every breeze through. For ordinary people, the linen was coarser, thicker. But still, it was linen. Still cooler than wool. The Egyptians rarely used wool. Wool was for foreigners, for people from cold countries. Wool was actually considered unclean for religious purposes. You couldn't enter a temple wearing wool. Only linen. Pure, cool, white linen. They would bleach the linen in the sun. Lay it out on the riverbank, or on the roof, and let the sun do its work. The fabric would turn bright white. Dazzling white. And that white fabric reflected the heat, didn't absorb it. White linen clothes. White linen sheets. Everything white, everything cool. Some people would use natron to help clean their linen. Natron, that special salt they also used for embalming. It was a natural cleaning agent. They would dissolve it in water, soak the linen, and it would come out fresh and clean. The linen would last longer. Stay cooler. Everything was thought out. Everything had a reason. Let me tell you about night sounds in ancient Egypt. What did people hear as they fell asleep? The river. Always the river. The Nile was never far away. You could hear it, if you listened. A soft murmur. The sound of water moving. Eternal, constant. Soothing. Frogs. The Egyptians loved frogs. Frogs were a sign of life, of fertility. The goddess Hecate, who helped with childbirth, had the head of a frog. So the sound of frogs croaking in the evening wasn't annoying. It was hopeful. It was the sound of life continuing. Birds. So many birds along the Nile. Herons and ibises, ducks and geese. As the evening came, they would settle in the reeds, calling to each other. A soft chorus. And then, as night fell, they would quiet. Just occasional rustles and murmurs as they shifted in their sleep. Dogs. The Egyptians kept dogs. Loyal companions. Hunting dogs, guard dogs, pets. The dogs would bark sometimes at night, alerting to a sound or a stranger. But mostly, they would sleep too, curled up in doorways or corners. Human sounds. Voices, soft and low. A mother singing to a child. An old man coughing. Lovers whispering. The sounds of life, of families, of a community settling in for the night. And in the distance, if you were near the desert, perhaps the sound of the wind. The wind moving over sand. A soft, sussurrating sound. The breath of the desert. These were the sounds that carried ancient Egyptians into sleep. Not the hum of an air conditioner. Not the buzz of electric lights. Just the natural sounds of the world around them. Let me tell you about children. How did children sleep in the heat? Babies were wrapped in light linen. Swaddling, but not tight, heavy swaddling. Just a light wrap to keep them secure, to help them feel safe. The mothers knew that in the heat, a baby couldn't be bundled up. They would overheat, become distressed. So the swaddling was minimal. Just enough. Babies would sleep near their mothers. Close. In the same room, often in the same bed. The mother's presence was soothing. And the mother could keep watch, make sure the baby was cool enough, not too hot. If a baby became fussy from heat, the mother would dampen a cloth and gently wipe the baby's skin. Cool the baby down. Whisper softly. Soothe and settle. Young children would sleep on mats near their parents. As they got older, they might share a mat with siblings. Brothers and sisters, lined up like little sardines, all in a row. This was normal. Privacy wasn't really a concept for children. You slept where there was room. You learned to sleep through your brother's snoring, your sister's fidgeting. And during the very hottest nights, children would be taken to the roof. It became a kind of adventure. The whole family, climbing up to sleep under the stars. The children would be excited at first, looking at the stars, pointing out constellations. The Egyptians loved the stars, and they taught their children the patterns. There was Orion, the god Osiris. There was Sirius, the star of Isis. When Sirius rose just before dawn, it signaled the coming flood. The children would learn these things, lying on their backs, staring up at the sky. And then, slowly, the excitement would fade. The children's voices would quiet. One by one, they would drift off to sleep. And the parents would lie there a while longer, watching over them, listening to the soft sound of their breathing. There's something about sleeping under the stars that's deeply peaceful. Even in the heat. Maybe especially in the heat. Because you're not fighting it anymore. You're not trying to shut it out behind walls and windows. You're just there. Present. Part of the night. The heat radiates out of your body into the vast sky. You feel small. Connected. Safe in your smallness. Let me tell you about dreams. The Egyptians believed dreams were important. They believed dreams could be messages from the gods, or warnings, or glimpses of the future. There were even dream interpretation manuals. Long papyrus scrolls listing different dreams and what they meant. If you dreamed of your teeth falling out, it meant your relatives would die. If you dreamed of drinking warm beer, it meant suffering was coming. But if you dreamed of looking into a deep well, it meant you would be at peace. If you dreamed of the sky raining, it meant good things. They took dreams seriously. So when you went to sleep, you might whisper a prayer, asking for good dreams. Asking Bes, the protective god, to keep nightmares away. Some people would wear amulets to bed. Little charms to ensure peaceful sleep. And when they woke, if they remembered a dream, they would think about it. Talk about it. Try to understand what it meant. Dreams were a way the divine spoke to humans. So even in sleep, even in the stillness of the night, there was connection. Meaning. Purpose. Let me tell you about the sick and the elderly. How did they manage the heat? Illness was common in ancient Egypt. Despite the dry climate, which prevented some diseases, there were others. Parasites from the river water. Eye infections from the ever-present dust. Injuries from hard labor. And the heat itself could make you ill. Heat stroke. Dehydration. Exhaustion. When someone was sick, they would be moved to the coolest part of the house. A room that was more underground than the others, perhaps. Or a shaded courtyard. They would be given water, constantly. Cool water from the well or the canal, stored in clay jars that kept it cool. The Egyptians knew about the cooling power of evaporation. They would place a sick person on a damp mat. Not soaking wet, just damp. And they would fan them. Slowly, gently. Creating a breeze. The evaporation would cool the skin, bring the fever down. They had medicines, too. Remedies made from plants. Willow bark for pain and fever. Honey for wounds. Garlic for strength. Poppy for sleep. If someone couldn't sleep because of pain or fever, they might be given a drink made with poppy. It would ease the pain. Bring sleep. Healing sleep. The elderly were cared for with great respect. Old age was honored in Egypt. If you lived to be old, it meant you were wise, blessed by the gods. An elderly person would have the coolest sleeping spot. The best mat. The finest linen sheet. Their family would make sure they were comfortable. And elderly people, they knew all the old ways. All the tricks for staying cool. They would teach the young ones. Sleep with your head to the north, they might say. The north wind is cooler. Or wet your hands and feet before you lie down. The big veins are near the surface there. Cooling them cools your whole body. Little bits of wisdom. Passed down. Generation to generation. Grandmother to mother to daughter. Grandfather to father to son. This is how we lived. This is how we survived. This is how we slept. Let me tell you about the night watch. In every community, there were people who stayed awake at night. Watchmen. Guarding against thieves, or fire, or wild animals. They would walk the streets slowly, carrying a staff, maybe a small oil lamp. For these watchmen, the night was different. They would see the town at its most peaceful. All the houses quiet. All the people sleeping. Just the soft glow of a lamp here and there, someone up with a sick child or an elderly parent. The dogs would know the watchman's footsteps, wouldn't bark. Just a thump of a tail, a quiet acknowledgement. The watchman might stop at a fountain to drink. Splash water on his face to stay awake. Sit for a moment in the coolest spot he knew, a little courtyard with a pool, and just breathe. And then continue his rounds. In the very early morning, before dawn, the watchman would call out. A signal that the night was ending. Time to wake. A new day. People would stir. The cycle would begin again. But for now, it's still night. Full, deep night. The best time for sleep. Let me tell you about the palace. How did the pharaoh sleep? The pharaoh was a god. Or at least, partly divine. The son of Ra, the sun god. You would think the sun god's son wouldn't mind the heat. But pharaohs were human too. They felt the heat like everyone else. The royal palaces were marvels of cooling technology. Thick walls, of course. But also gardens. Extensive gardens with pools and fountains. Shade trees. Palms and sycamores. The air in these gardens would be noticeably cooler. Servants would maintain the pools, keep them filled, keep them clean. The pharaoh's bedroom would be large, with high ceilings. Hot air rises, so a high ceiling helps. The room would have multiple windows, carefully placed to create cross-ventilation. And there would be servants with fans. Large fans made of ostrich feathers. They would stand on either side of the bed, fanning gently, creating a constant breeze. The pharaoh's bed would be a work of art. Carved wood, maybe gilded. Inlaid with ivory and precious stones. The mattress would be the finest woven cords. The sheets would be the sheerest linen. The headrest would be beautifully carved, maybe in the shape of a god or a sacred animal. And yet, for all this luxury, the basic principle was the same. Keep cool. Keep air moving. Use the right materials. Even a god needed these things. Some pharaohs had summer palaces. Palaces built in cooler locations. Perhaps in the delta, where the sea breezes would reach. Or in the Fayum, near a lake. They would move with the seasons, like birds migrating. Following the comfortable temperatures. But even pharaohs, sometimes, would sleep on the roof. Under the stars. Because sometimes, the simplest solution is the best. Why lie in a stuffy room, even a beautiful one, when you could lie under the infinite sky? Let me tell you about death. I know, that seems dark. But stay with me. This is important. The Egyptians thought a lot about death. They prepared for it. They believed that after death, you would need all the same things you needed in life. Food, water, clothes, furniture. And a comfortable place to sleep. The tombs, especially for the wealthy, were like houses. Underground houses. They had rooms, corridors, sometimes even furniture carved from stone. And many tombs had a stone bed. A place for the deceased to rest. To sleep the eternal sleep. The tombs were cool. Built into the rock, deep underground where the temperature was constant. No matter how hot it got outside, inside the tomb it was cool. Peaceful. Quiet. They would provision the tomb with everything needed. Jars of food and drink. Clothes. Amulets. And yes, headrests. Beautiful headrests, sometimes made of faience or alabaster. Because even in death, you needed to rest your head comfortably. There's something touching about that. The care they took. Making sure their loved ones would be comfortable. Would have what they needed. Even in death, even in eternity, the same attention to detail. The same understanding that sleep is important. Rest is sacred. The funeral texts, the spells and prayers inscribed on tomb walls, often mentioned sleep. They talked about resting peacefully. About rising renewed. The cycle of death and rebirth was often compared to sleep and waking. Each night, when you closed your eyes, you died a little death. Each morning, when you woke, you were reborn. So sleep was sacred. Sleep was a rehearsal for death. And if you could sleep well, peacefully, comfortably, even in the heat, then perhaps death would be peaceful too. I don't mean to make you melancholy. Just the opposite. There's comfort in this, I think. The idea that rest is so important, it extends beyond life. That the need for peace, for coolness, for comfort, is so fundamental that it's part of the eternal. Let me tell you about music. The Egyptians loved music. They had harps and lyres, flutes and drums. And they believed music could soothe the spirit. Help you relax. Help you sleep. In wealthy households, there might be musicians. Harpists, especially. The harp was associated with calm, with peace. A harpist might play softly in the evening, as the family relaxed after dinner. Gentle melodies. Repetitive, soothing patterns. The same kind of music that we might use today to help us sleep. For ordinary people, music was simpler. Perhaps a mother humming to her child. A lullaby, passed down through generations. The melody half forgotten, but the rhythm's still there. The intention's still there. Hush now. Rest. All is well. Or perhaps just the sound of someone's voice. Talking softly. Telling a story. The Egyptians loved stories. Tales of the gods, of heroes, of clever animals. These stories would be told and retold, especially to children. And the familiar rhythm of a well-known story is deeply soothing. You know how it goes. You know how it ends. There are no surprises. Just the comfort of repetition. Let me tell you about scent. The Egyptians loved perfumes and incense. Frankincense and myrrh, of course. But also scents made from flowers. Lotus especially. The blue lotus, the white lotus. Sacred flowers. They would make perfumes from them, oils and unguents. In the evening, you might rub a little scented oil on your skin. Not a heavy perfume. Just a light scent. The oil would moisturize your skin, which could get dry in the desert air. And the scent would be calming. Lotus was said to be relaxing. To help with sleep. Some houses would burn incense in the evening. Just a little. The smoke would drift through the rooms, carrying its scent. Purifying the air. Creating an atmosphere of calm. Scent is powerful. It can change your mood. Transport you. Make you remember. For the Egyptians, the right scent in the evening was part of the ritual of sleep. A signal to the body and mind. The day is over. It's time to rest. Let me tell you about touch. The feel of things. Because this mattered. The smoothness of linen. The coolness of stone or wood. The gentle curve of a headrest. These sensations were part of the experience of sleep. Some people would pour a little water on their hands and feet before lying down. The water would evaporate, cooling the skin. But also, the wetness, the sensation of it, was refreshing. Soothing. If you had a partner, you might sleep close together. Touching. Even in the heat, human contact is comforting. You might not embrace tightly. That would be too hot. But a hand on a shoulder. Feet touching. Just that connection. That reminder that you're not alone. Parents and children. The touch of a mother's hand, stroking a child's hair. Soothing them to sleep. Or an elderly grandparent, holding a grandchild's hand. These small touches. So important. So human. Let me tell you about the morning. Because the way you sleep affects how you wake. In ancient Egypt, if you slept well, you woke refreshed. Ready for the day. You would rise before dawn, as we said. The house cool and quiet. You would pour water from a jug to wash your face, your hands, your feet. The water cool and clean. Purifying. You might say a prayer. Thank the gods for the night's rest. For protection from harm. For good dreams. You would dress simply. A linen kilt for a man. A simple linen dress for a woman. Maybe nothing at all if you were staying home, working in your courtyard. And then you would step outside. The air fresh. The sky brightening. A new day. And you could face it because you had rested. Because you had slept, despite the heat. Because you lived in rhythm with the sun, with the seasons, with the land. Let me tell you about some specific people. Real people, or at least, as real as we can know from thousands of years ago. There was a man named Ka. He was an architect, a foreman of workers at Deir el-Medina. He lived during the reigns of Amenhotep II, Tutmos IV, and Amenhotep III. That's around 1400 BCE. His tomb was found intact, full of the things he and his wife Merit would need in the afterlife. In that tomb, there was a beautiful bed. A wooden bed with carved legs. And there were linen sheets. Fine, beautiful linen. And headrests. One for Ka, one for Merit. We can imagine them, lying down each night after a day of work. Ka tired from supervising the workers, dealing with problems, making sure the construction went smoothly. Merit tired from managing the household, preparing food, caring for children. They would lie down on their bed, in their small but well-made house. The walls thick and cool. A small window high up, letting in a bit of breeze. And they would rest their heads on their headrests. Feel the cool wood against their necks. Close their eyes. And sleep. They lived long lives. Long enough to prepare a tomb, to fill it with beautiful things. Long enough to see grandchildren, perhaps. And every night of those long lives, they slept in the heat. And managed. There was a woman named Nornacht. We know about her because she left a will. A legal document describing how her property should be divided after her death. She lived in Deir el-Medina too, but later, during the reign of Ramesses V, around 1140 BCE. In her will, she disinherited some of her children. They hadn't taken care of her in her old age, she said. She was angry about it. But the children she approved of, the ones who had cared for her, they got everything. Imagine Nornacht as an old woman. Imagine her at night, lying on her mat. Perhaps her bones ached. Perhaps she couldn't sleep as easily as when she was young. But her dutiful children made sure she was comfortable. Made sure she had the coolest room. Made sure she had water nearby. Made sure she could rest. And she remembered. She remembered who had cared for her. And she rewarded them. Because care matters. Comfort matters. The small kindnesses that help someone sleep in the heat, in old age, when everything is harder. Those kindnesses are worth everything. There were thousands of people. Millions, over the 3,000 years of ancient Egyptian civilization. And each one of them slept. Each one of them found a way to rest in the heat. And their collective wisdom, their collective solutions, became the culture. The way of life. Let me tell you about the different regions of Egypt. Because Egypt is long. Very long. The Nile flows from south to north, from the cataracts in Nubia all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. That's hundreds of miles. And the climate isn't exactly the same everywhere. In the south, in Upper Egypt, it's hotter. Drier. The deserts are closer. Cities like Aswan and Luxor, they bake in the summer. The stones of the temples there hold heat like ovens. People there needed every cooling trick they knew. In the north, in Lower Egypt, in the delta, it's a bit milder. The Mediterranean Sea is close. Sea breezes help. It's more humid, which has its own challenges, but the temperatures aren't quite as extreme. People there might not need to sleep on their roofs as often. Might not need to dampen their sheets. But everywhere, the principles were the same. Thick walls. Proper ventilation. Light fabrics. Water. Shade. Rest during the hottest part of the day. Work in the cool of morning and evening. And everywhere, the Nile. The river was life. The river was coolness in the heat. You could always go to the river. Stand in the shallows. Feel the water move around your ankles. Splash water on your face. Fill your jug. Children would play in the river. Swimming, splashing, cooling off. It was dangerous, of course. There were crocodiles. Hippos. But the children learned to be careful. Learned where it was safe. And the joy of the cool water was worth the risk. Adults would bathe in the river too. In the evening, after work. Wade in, wash off the day's sweat and dust. Feel human again. Clean and cool. And then home. Back to the house. The clean, cool house. To prepare for sleep. Let me tell you about the desert. The desert was always there. East and west, the Red Land, the desert. The Egyptians called the fertile land along the Nile the Black Land, because of the rich dark soil the flood brought. But beyond that, the Red Land. Sand and rock and heat. The desert was dangerous. Home to snakes and scorpions. Home to Seth, the god of chaos and storms. But the desert was also protective. It kept invaders at bay. And it kept Egypt dry. That dryness, that lack of rain, was what made the heat bearable. What made the nights cool. If Egypt had been humid, if it had been like a jungle, the heat would have been unbearable. You can't cool down in humid heat. Your sweat doesn't evaporate. You just stay hot and wet and miserable. But in the dry desert air, sweat works. Evaporation works. Damp sheets cool you. Clay jars cool water. The night brings relief. So the desert, for all its harshness, was part of the solution. The Egyptians understood this. They respected the desert. Feared it, yes. But also understood that it was necessary. Part of the balance. Let me tell you about festivals. The Egyptians loved festivals. Religious festivals, celebrating the gods. There were so many festivals throughout the year. Processions, offerings, feasts. Some festivals involved staying up late. All-night vigils. Music and dancing. Lamps burning through the darkness. These were special occasions. Times when the normal rhythms of life were set aside. But even on festival nights, eventually, you had to sleep. You would stumble home in the pre-dawn darkness, tired and happy. Lie down on your mat. And sleep hard. Deep, dreamless sleep. The sleep of exhaustion and contentment. And the next day, you might sleep late. Or take a longer midday rest. Your body recovering. And that was fine. That was expected. You celebrated hard, you rested hard. Balance. Let me tell you about the animals. Animals sleep too, and the Egyptians paid attention to how they managed the heat. Dogs would find the coolest spot. Under a bench. In a doorway where the cross breeze was best. They would lie on their sides, panting slightly, conserving energy. The Egyptians learned from this. If the dog knows to lie in that spot, it must be the coolest spot. Cats, sacred to the goddess Bastet, were everywhere. Cats would sleep through the hot part of the day. Curled up in the shade. Utterly relaxed. Only stirring in the evening when the air cooled and the mice came out. The Egyptians appreciated this. The cat's wisdom. Work when it's cool. Sleep when it's hot. Cattle would stand in the river during the day. Up to their bellies in water. Chewing their cud. Staying cool. At night, they would lie down in their pens, under the stars. The Egyptians would build shelters for them, but often the animals preferred to be outside. Where the air could move. Even the sacred animals. The ibises in the temples. The crocodiles in the sacred pools. They all knew how to handle the heat. And the Egyptians, watching them, learned. Let me tell you about travelers. People who came to Egypt from other lands. What did they think of the heat? The Greeks who visited Egypt, writers like Herodotus, were amazed. They came from a land of cooler temperatures, of rain. Egypt seemed like another world to them. They wrote about the heat. About the strange ways Egyptians lived. Sleeping on roofs. Wearing hardly any clothes. Bathing constantly. Some of it seemed barbaric to them. Some of it seemed wise. But they all noted how the Egyptians seemed perfectly adapted to their environment. How they thrived in conditions that would have made a Greek miserable. The Egyptians, for their part, thought foreigners were strange. Why would you wear heavy wool in the heat? Why would you build houses with steep roofs when it never rains? Every culture thinks its own way is normal. It's everyone else who's odd. But travelers learned. If you came to Egypt and wanted to survive, you adopted Egyptian ways. You wore linen. You rested at midday. You learned to sleep in the heat. And when those travelers went home, perhaps they took some lessons with them. Perhaps they remembered the cool touch of linen. The cleverness of a thick mud brick wall. The simple wisdom of working in rhythm with the sun. Let me tell you about love. People falling asleep next to someone they love. Because that happened too, of course. In all times, in all places, people fall in love. And lovers want to sleep close. There are love poems from ancient Egypt. Beautiful poems. My heart thought of my love of you, one says. When I had only completed half my coiffure. I came in haste at the running, and neglected my cosmetics. Love makes you forget yourself. Makes you rush. makes you careless of appearance. And at night, love makes you want to be close, even in the heat. So lovers would find a way. They would lie close together, as close as the heat allowed. Maybe not embracing. That would be too much. But side by side. Hand in hand. Close enough to hear each other breathe. And they would talk, perhaps. Whisper in the darkness. Plans for the future. Memories of the past. Sweet words. Silly words. The kind of words you only say in the dark, when it's just the two of you. And then, talking less. Breathing more. Drifting. Together. Into sleep. There's something beautiful about falling asleep next to someone you love. In any time. In any place. Even in the heat of ancient Egypt. Maybe especially there. Because you chose to be close despite the discomfort. Because love mattered more than comfort. Let me tell you about the very old times. The beginning of Egypt. Before the pyramids. Before the great temples. When people were just figuring out how to live along the Nile. Even then, thousands of years before the pharaohs, people had to sleep. And it was just as hot. Maybe hotter. The climate changes over millennia. Some scholars think it was even drier then. Those early people lived in simple shelters. Huts made of reeds and mud. Very basic. But even then, they knew. They built their huts near the river. They made them with thick walls. They slept on mats. We found burials from those times. People buried with their possessions. And sometimes, with a mat. A headrest. The same basic tools for sleep that would be used for thousands of years to come. Some things are just fundamental. Just human. The need for sleep. For comfort. For coolness in the heat. These needs don't change. Only the solutions get a bit more refined over time. Let me tell you about the very late times. The end of ancient Egypt. When the Romans ruled. When Egypt was a province of a foreign empire. The Romans brought their own ideas. They built bathhouses. Public baths with hot rooms and cold rooms. The Egyptians must have thought the hot rooms were madness. Why would you want to be in a hot room when you're already hot? But the cold rooms. The cold plunge pools. Those made sense. Those were wonderful. The Romans also brought glass windows. Real glass, not just small panes, but larger pieces. This changed things. You could have a bigger window and still keep the dust out. More light. More ventilation. But the basic Egyptian wisdom persisted. Thick walls. Linen clothes. Midday rest. The Romans who settled in Egypt adopted these ways. Had to, really. Rome's methods worked in Rome. In Egypt, you did things the Egyptian way. And people still slept on roofs under the stars. Even Roman officials, lying on their beds brought from Italy, would sometimes say, "It's too hot. Let's sleep outside." And they would. Under the Egyptian sky. Cooled by the Egyptian night. Let me tell you about memory. How sleep and memory intertwine. The Egyptians believed memory was important. That remembering the dead kept them alive in the afterlife. Speak the name of the dead, and they live again, they said. And sleep is where memories are processed. Where the day's experiences become part of you. You lie down after a long day. Close your eyes. And your mind sorts through everything. Decides what to keep. What to let go. In the cool of the night, after the heat of the day, your mind could rest. Could process. Could dream. And in the morning, you would wake with everything settled. Organized. Ready for a new day. Without good sleep, memory suffers. Learning suffers. Everything suffers. The Egyptians might not have known the science of it, but they knew the reality. They knew that rest mattered. That you couldn't think clearly, work well, or live well without proper sleep. So all their efforts, all their clever solutions for sleeping in the heat, these weren't just about comfort. They were about survival. About functioning. About being human. Let me tell you about hope. Because sleeping well is an act of hope. You close your eyes trusting that you'll wake again, that the sun will rise, that tomorrow will come. The Egyptians were good at hope. They had to be. They lived in a harsh land. The desert could kill you. The river could flood too much or too little. Disease, injury, war. So many dangers. But they believed in Maut. The concept of order, balance, harmony. They believed that if you lived rightly, if you maintained balance, things would be okay. Not perfect. Not easy. But okay. And every night, lying down to sleep was an act of faith in Maut. Faith that the balance would hold. That the night would cool. That the morning would come. That life would go on. So they slept. Despite the heat. Despite everything. They rested. They dreamed. They woke. They continued. For 3,000 years. 3,000 years of sleeping in the heat. Of finding cool spots. Of clever solutions. Of simply enduring. That's remarkable. That's worth remembering. That's worth learning from. Let me tell you what we can learn. We, in our modern world with our air conditioning and our electric fans and our refrigeration. What can we learn from ancient Egyptians sleeping in the heat? We can learn about resilience. About adaptation. About living in rhythm with the natural world instead of fighting against it. We can learn that sometimes the old ways are wise. Thick walls. Natural materials. Shade and water and rest. We can learn that comfort isn't about technology. It's about understanding. About paying attention to your body. To your environment. About making small, smart choices. We can learn that community matters. Families sleeping side by side. Neighbors sharing knowledge. Generations passing down wisdom. We can learn that rest is sacred. That it's not laziness to sleep during the heat of the day. It's wisdom. We can learn to be grateful. Grateful for the cool of the night. For the gift of water. For the simple, basic things that make life possible. And maybe, just maybe, we can learn to sleep a little better ourselves. To create our own rituals. To pay attention to temperature, to fabrics, to sound and scent and touch. To treat sleep as important. As sacred. As necessary. Let me tell you one more thing. About the eternal nature of sleep. Sleep is one of the most universal human experiences. Everyone sleeps. Everyone has slept. For all of human history. The ancient Egyptian closing their eyes on a reed mat is not so different from you, closing your eyes right now. The same need. The same surrender. The same trust. Thousands of years have passed. Civilizations have risen and fallen. But sleep remains. Constant. Necessary. Beautiful. And when you close your eyes tonight, you're part of that long, long chain. Connected to all the people who have ever slept. All the people who have ever sought rest and found it, despite the challenges. Despite the heat, the cold, the fear, the pain. They slept. You sleep. It's a connection across time. Across space. A reminder that we're all human. All fragile. All in need of rest. So rest now. Let the ancient Egyptians be your companions. Imagine them, all those millions of people, lying down under the stars or in their cool dark rooms. Closing their eyes. Breathing slowly. Drifting off. Join them. Let go of the day. Let go of your worries. You've done enough. You've learned enough for one night. The story of how ancient Egyptians slept in the heat is ultimately a simple story. They paid attention. They adapted. They used what they had. They rested when they needed to rest. And they survived. They thrived. You can too. Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Feel the surface beneath you. Let it support you. You don't have to hold yourself up anymore. The day is done. The heat, whatever heat you carry, will pass. The cool will come. Rest will come. Sleep well, Dear one, sleep well. Let the river of time carry you gently into dreams. Let the stars watch over you as they watched over those ancient people, so long ago. You are safe. You are comfortable. You are ready for sleep. The ancient Egyptians knew something important. They knew that no matter how hot the day, the night brings relief. No matter how hard the work, rest comes. No matter how long the journey, there's always a place to lie down. And that place is here. Now. This moment. So sleep. Like the pharaohs and the farmers, the priests and the workers, the mothers and the children. Like all the countless souls who have lived and loved and labored under the Egyptian sun. Sleep. Rest. Dream. And wake tomorrow, refreshed. Ready. Grateful for the gift of rest. Good night. Sleep well. May your dreams be peaceful. May your rest be deep. May you wake with the dawn, like the ancient Egyptians, ready to face the new day with strength and hope. Good night.